against everybody told me, don't do this. This is too much. I went with it though. I committed to it.
U.S. number 31 calling McMurdo. Come in, over. U.S. number 31 calling McMurdo. Urgent. Come in, over.
Welcome back to our complete coverage of John Carpenter's 1982 The Thing for our John Carpenter series. If you haven't seen our Part 1 video, we suggest you do that now. Otherwise, let's continue. After John Carpenter took over The Thing, Lawrence Turman and David Foster brought in their illustrator Dale Kuipers, who they worked with on Caveman, to help him visualize the creature for the film. Dale flew in from Wisconsin, and he drew up some sketches for Carpenter in his office, and John hired him. Dale's creature was a shapeshifter, but was different than Botine's version. It would jump on your head like a facehugger, and would then scan its victim's alpha waves, and it would duplicate the victim perfectly by doing so. The creature also had the ability to produce hallucinogens in its environment that would cause others to see hideous forms around them. After working on a few concepts and building a sculpt of the creature, which you can see here, Dale was put on leave from the project as he got into an accident in Green Bay which required him to have a few months to recover. But the filmmakers had to move forward, so they hired another to build his designs. At the time, Rob Bottin had just finished on The Howling, and Carpenter spoke with him about the project. He wanted Bottin to construct Dale's designs. Bottin wasn't sold on the designs, though, citing that it was too much alien, and The Thing needed to be unique. In short, he wanted to design the creature himself, and therefore suggested that the thing could be anything, any shape, and had no regard for the human form, and therefore would be amalgamations of things it absorbed in the past. Carpenter was interested and told Bottin to do some concept work with the help of illustrator Mike Plug, who was also working on storyboards for the film. Joining them was writer Bill Lancaster, who would have to change the script based on Bottin's designs because he was proposing something completely different for the creature. Early designs of the creature varied, as you can see, and it took time for the creature to find its true form, if you will. Finally, Dale returned after proper healing to discover that Bottin had designed an entirely new creature. Dale was offered a job as designer and sculptor, but he decided to leave the project as he felt the concept was too far removed from his. Things moved forward with storyboards and designs, and on March 1981, the second draft of the script was complete. With many storyboards and production design elements realized, they needed to figure out where they were going to make their Antarctican base. And originally, Carpenter wanted to film the base at the same site where Howard Hawks filmed the saucer being discovered in A Thing from Another World. A team actually went to Montana to check the location, but the truth was that area had received minimal snow for the last 2 years. So they decided to send Stuart Cohen and a team to scout Alaska and British Columbia. They found a site at an edge of a glacier that was picturesque and had a fairly flat surface for constructing a camp near Hyder, Alaska, on the border of Canada. As things moved forward with Bottin's designs, Carpenter sat back somewhat, as he was noted to say that Rob was a little in over his head. However, Carpenter took a leap of faith in the young man, as his ideas were unique. Carpenter then moved on to casting the film. Richard Masur and John Carpenter knew each other after meeting through Tom Mackey. Over time, they attended get-togethers, and when they would bump into each other, they were chummy. Masur loved Who Goes There and The Thing from Another World. He had heard that The Thing was in the works, and at first he was disgusted because he thought remaking The Thing from Another World was ridiculous. Then he heard it was an adaptation of Who Goes There, and Masur asked John to read the script. When he saw John again, he showed interest, and that's when John said, "Who do you think you want to play?" Masur asked, "Who is the guy that runs the place?" Carpenter quickly replied, "Not you." So instead of landing the role of Gary, Masur stated he really liked the dog handler, and Carpenter asked, "Why?" "I love this character. I just think he's so misanthropic. He doesn't seem to want to be with anybody but the dogs." John stated the part was his if he wanted it, and Masur accepted. The casting director for The Thing, Anita Dan, put forth a casting call for the film. For Blair, originally Donald Pleasance was eyed by Carpenter, but at that point he was a bit famous, and they needed someone that was less noticeable, for reasons we will go into when we cover the film. Wilford Brimley was then tapped for the role. Rob Bottin asked if he could play the part of stoner and conspiracy theorist Palmer, but Stuart Cohen stated no. I put a stop to that because he was way behind schedule, and as I told him, we're after actors for this who can bring a lot with them to the roles. You don't have time, and you're not doing it. David Clennon was asked to come in and try for the part of Bennings, but when he read the script, he thought Palmer was more fun. Peter Maloney was trying out for the part at the same time Clennon was, and one of the big audition spots for the film was in New York at the Coca-Cola building. According to Maloney, they were asked to improvise scenes where they were attacked by a creature, trying to defend themselves by flipping tables and showing fear. At the end of the audition, he was asked how he would feel if he filmed a movie in the coldest place on Earth, and he replied that it was fine. He loved every aspect of making movies. That was when producer David Foster leaned forward and asked him, "Well, what do you love about it, making movies?" Peter Maloney's reply was simple: the coffee. There's always a hot, large urn of coffee around your workplace, and I love that. When they decided to cast Peter Maloney as Bennings, Carpenter decided that David Clennon could try out for Palmer. Universal was screening comedians like Gary Shandling, Jay Leno, and Charles Fleischer for the part, but Carpenter opted for David Clennon instead, as he wanted someone more serious for the role. For Knowles, Franklin A.J. came in for a reading, and the comedian then began lecturing the interviewees, stating that Knowles was a black stereotype. Obviously, he didn't get the part. Instead, the part went to one of my 70s and 80s favorites, T.K. Carter, as I always looked for him since he was on one of my favorite TV shows, Good Times, as one of JJ's friends.
The roller derby, where the thrills are exceeded only by the vicious brutality of its demented participants.
And I positively loved his role in 1980's Seems Like Old Times as Chester.
Where'd you get that hat?
From a chauffeur?
You stole it.
No, I found it.
Where?
On a chauffeur.
Oh, TK, you should have been in more stuff. Keith David tried out for the part of Childs, but lost to Roger Mosley, who was officially cast for that character. Other candidates for Childs were Jeffrey Holder, Isaac Hayes, Carl Weathers, and Bernie Casey. Ernie Hudson was also a big contender for the role. In a surprise twist, Mosley was offered a part in Magnum P.I., and so he decided to take that gig instead. So he passed on The Thing. Keith then got the part because he was the runner-up. The two big choices for Copper were Brian Dennehy and William Daniels, but at the last minute, Carpenter chose Richard Dysart. Joel Polis was cast for Fuchs, mainly because Carpenter remembered Polis for being in a student film while he was at USC and felt he fit that part. He had seen The Thing when he was 8 and was terrified by the movie. When the interview finally came, he sat down with John and heard he went to USC and asked if he did a lot of play work. John was blunt and said he didn't, and Polis was shocked because play directing was big to him and the school. He asked, "Well, how the F are you supposed to direct me then?" Producer David Foster looked at Joel like he just lost the job, but John Carpenter smiled. and hired him just because of that moment. When he got cast, he took a college biology course to get more familiar with the character's career. This would be Joel's first feature film he was cast on. For Gary, they originally considered Powers Booth, Lee Van Cleef, Jerry Orbach, Kevin Conway, and Richard Mulligan, but in the end, it fell to Donald Moffat. While they were doing casting in New York, Kurt Russell and Carpenter went to a play called American Buffalo that had Al Pacino, Clifton James, and Thomas G. Waits. Carpenter was impressed by Waits, and he was contacted to audition for the character of Sanchez, who was the radio operator. Currently, the person in the number one spot for the role of Sanchez was none other than Brad Dourif. Tom hated the name of the character and was not enthusiastic. He didn't like horror, and he barely read the script. He said when he went to the audition, he went in ice cold. He didn't put much effort into getting the part, but he did want to leave his play because he was doing 8 shows a week for a year and just wanted a change. After he got the part, the character's name was turned into John Simmons, another boring name Waits did not like. Now, Kurt Russell helped John with who to cast for MacReady, and Kurt was fairly familiar with the project. Candidates for MacReady were vast, ranging from Christopher Walken, Nick Nolte, Jeff Bridges, Ed Harris, John Hurd, Chris Christopherson, Tom Berenger, Scott Glenn, Fred Ward, Peter Coyote, and Tim McIntyre. Sam Shepard was interested, but was not pursued. Jack Thompson and Tom Atkins were strong contenders, but as we know, none of them got the part. One of the reasons Tom Atkins was not cast for MacReady, along with a few other familiar faces in Carpenter's library, was that Stuart Cohen suggested that Carpenter go outside his comfort zone of actors and cast people he never worked with before to make the film completely different than anything he made in the past. So originally, Kurt was not a target to go after for the lead in the film. Finally, it was down to the wire to cast MacReady, and Carpenter began leaning towards casting his pal Russell for the film, and the studio loved the idea. Russell grew a thick beard for the film, and then Carpenter added to the image by giving Russell a big hat to wear to finish the look. Russell loathed the hat, but wore it as instructed, and I'm sorry, Kurt, I frickin' love the look. Iconic, man. Simply iconic. Russell was the last character to be cast on the same day a large amount of the crew went to Alaska during June to build the location set so that it would be finished and ready for when the snows would fall and settle on the buildings. Russell would be paid $400,000 to do the film, while all other actors were paid $50,000 each. The cast was given 2 weeks to rehearse the film in an empty soundstage at Universal, with tables, chairs, and a single blackboard. This was a strange thing in a studio film, and it was suggested that the producers allowed this to assuage people from thinking the actors casted wouldn't just be there to play second fiddle to a monster. We had difficulty securing the people we wanted to initially meet, and it was only when I got them to read the script that they began to understand what we were up to and how well the characters were developed. It's a process John never repeated. I'm not sure he loved it at the time. I think he felt that it gave the actors too much power, but he did it, and here it made sense. When Tom Waits and Keith David saw each other, Waits was stunned and said, "What the F are you doing here?" Tom and Keith were old buddies from Juilliard and used to smoke pot in the stairwells together. I wonder if they did this during the production of The Thing. Methinks yes. This was Keith David's first film, as he had graduated from Juilliard a year ago, and his contract was for 20 weeks of filming, and he was very excited. Yet just before filming, he was in a car accident that was caused by his inexperience driving. No one was harmed except Keith, who broke 2 bones in his hand, and he was nervous that it would cost him the job, so he tried to hide it. When on set, John Carpenter and Larry Franco were walking towards Keith. Before introductions occurred, both of them suddenly noticed that Keith's hand was swollen up like a boxing glove, and they immediately reacted. So when you watch the film, you can notice that Keith's left hand is often hidden, and when you do see it, it's usually in a glove like you see here, until one scene and we will cover that scene after our behind-the-scenes coverage. During this period, the cast got to know each other quite well and got comfortable. It was during this time that John Carpenter screened The Thing from Another World for the cast, and he was also at these rehearsals. If something worked, Carpenter would tweak things in the script with Bill Lancaster, who was there as well. Carpenter also took the time during this period to call each actor to him, and they discussed their characters in great depth one-on-one. This care and focus by both directors and actors manifested itself into the film. For instance, Thomas Waits, who was currently a character named Simmons, hated that name, and one day while he was out jogging, he had sunglasses on, and Waits assumed that his character wanted to be a movie star and hated the world he got himself into in the Arctic. But to give the character more identity, Waits put on sunglasses during a rehearsal and asked Carpenter if the character's name can be changed to Windows. John took a drag on his cigarette, looked up, down, then gazed at everyone, and finally said, "Okay, from now on, everybody, Tommy wants us to call him Windows. Let's move on." However, when Carpenter left, 2 actors specifically hated the fact that Waits' character was now called Windows. They're like, "This is effing bull, man. This is so arbitrary. What are you doing? Letting him call himself Windows and wear sunglasses inside." John, I don't think he gave a F what they said. I think they only said it to me. I think they ridiculed me because they thought I was just doing it to get attention, but I really wasn't. Donald Moffat didn't want Tommy Waits to wear those sunglasses through the whole movie, and he didn't want to have to call him Windows. Not all of the actors' extensive work and suggestions would stay in the film. One such cut was the relationship between Childs and Clark. Both actors spent a lot of time together, deciding that they were the 2 physically largest men on the set, and as a result, they would be diametrically opposed to each other. None of this was from the script. It was simply actors taking it upon themselves to enhance characters in the script, and you will see some of this in the film, and we will cover that when we get there. The main photography for the film began in Universal Studios, California in the summer of 1981. All sets were usually 40 to 45 degrees, and when you went outside, it was around 100 degrees. Since there are many stories to cover about filming, we will start with stories about Wilford Brimley, as these events mainly occurred during the early shoot. At the beginning of the shoot, Brimley was auditioning for the film Tender Mercies as a favor to his buddy Robert Duvall. Brimley was around the cast mumbling that he had to meet that sumbitch director Bruce Beresford, and when the director came to the set to meet Brimley, they took a moment to discuss the film. This is the discussion that occurred, which was overheard by Tom Waits, who was waiting by the only phone on the set for a call.
And he goes into the audition and the director says, "I'd like to hear you read for the part." And Will goes, "I don't do that." And he goes, "Well, I'm not so sure you can play the part." And Will goes, "I'm not so sure you can direct the goddamn movie." And he gets up and walks out.
After this event, Duvall kept calling, asking Tom to get Brimley for him. Eventually, Wilford would do the film. On the set, everyone kept talking about meta things involving the Thing. Actors wondered if they knew they were the Thing when they became the Thing. They wondered if others would become the Thing, and it was non-stop. One person with little interest in this conversation was Richard Masur, who from day one knew he was human up until his death, because it was in the script. The only other person that didn't take part in this conversation was Wilford Brimley. One time when the actors were all sitting around in director chairs talking about this very subject, Wilford just sat there shaking his head. Someone finally asked him what was the matter, and he said, "Are you paying attention to what's going on here? Do you watch them playing grab-ass out there all the time? You think this movie's about us. It's not about us. It's about the rubber guy. Stop thinking about all this stuff." The actors working on the thing were constantly trying to improvise their characters to add more depth to them. For them, defining their motivations and world outlook was a big deal, with the exception to Wilford Brimley, who thought they were all overdoing it. Joel Polis was so excited about his role that he took a biology course, and when he told this to Brimley, he looked at him and said, "What'd you do that for?" Actors like Thomas Waits would constantly pester Carpenter on his motivation, and Carpenter would ask him if he needs motivation for everything. To which Waits responded, "Well, yeah, I'm an actor. I have to know why I'm doing it." Carpenter stressed that he was the director. He shot what's on screen, and therefore the actors worried about that stuff. But the actors kept continuing this approach until one day Carpenter came around the actors, who were all huddled talking about their characters. And this is what he said. "What are you guys talking about? Your motivation? I'll tell you what your motivation is. It's your paycheck. Now leave me alone." Despite the close and friendly nature on the set, there was still tension for one reason or another sometimes. For Joel Polis and Keith David's first or second day of shooting, there was a critical death scene that would unfold. Childs, Windows, and Palmer were supposed to walk down a corridor, and they would enter a room where they discovered Fuchs dead with a shovel in his chest. It was well rehearsed by the three actors for about 2 weeks now. When the red light came on for filming, they discussed amongst themselves why they were doing this scene, because it was going to get cut, as it made no sense why the thing would kill someone with a shovel rather than absorb and copy the person. That's when Keith David recalled,
I've done 2 pictures with John, and I've never, ever heard him raise his voice, really. Until that day, when he came around the corner, "We're shooting this fucking scene because I want this to happen! And the 3 of us were sitting there shitting in our pants as well. "Oh,
The death scene never made it to the final cut, as later John agreed with the assessment that the thing wouldn't kill a person this way. Thomas G. Waits recalled he also had a scene with David Clennon that was like a page and a half in length. They were practicing on set, and John entered, telling them they had to cut that scene and they didn't need to practice it. After John left the room, Waits was pissed because it was a big scene, and the 2 actors began complaining vehemently between themselves with lots of cuss words. What they didn't know was that Dean Cundy and John Carpenter were in the other room talking about a scene, and John kept pausing his chat with Cundy to listen into his headphones. John was sitting with me, and we were talking about the next shot or something, and he was listening on his headphones, and he stopped and he listened, and then he turned to me and said, "Excuse me, just a minute." And he calmly walked down the hall and around the corner, and there was silence. And then he walked back and he said, "I think I took care of that. Now what were we saying?" What Dean didn't know was that John returned to the room where his 2 actors were complaining and told them that they were on hot mics and that he heard everything they said. He then left without another word, and Waits felt very bad about it because he was grateful for the part. He was pretty harsh with his words too. Before the shoot was over, he would write John Carpenter a letter to apologize. When it came time to film the scene where Palmer said his iconic line,
"You gotta be fucking kidding."
it was originally intended to simply be an over-the-shoulder shot of him saying the line while seeing the creature skitter. When cut was called and folks were preparing to leave the set, Richard Masser went to John and insisted that he do coverage for Palmer because he saw that it was the funniest moment in the movie, and they needed to focus on Palmer when he said the line. Carpenter said they didn't need to shoot that, and then showed him it wasn't in the storyboard. Masser stated he didn't give an F about the storyboard, and that John had to do coverage for the scene. I said, "You have to shoot David saying the line. If you don't shoot David saying the line, you will regret this for the rest of your life." John tried to move on, but Masser was insistent and pestered John so much about the shot that Carpenter finally caved in and said, F it, shoot it. This shot, of course, would become iconic, and it shows how a director who listens to their crew can evolve their films into more than conceptually intended. Now, when Doc lost his arms, they used a real-life amputee who lost his arms during an industrial accident, and he was actually given a Doc mask to wear. In the film, a lot of people don't notice the mask because they're focused on the gore of his arms. When filming the scene, some of the actors and crew were appalled, thinking the man would be reliving his accident while filming the scene. Some of the actors would go up to the man in an overly caring manner, asking if he was cool and if everything was okay. And this was how Joe Carone, the amputee, replied. "This is great. This is so great. I can't wait to do this." The effects Rob Bottin and his team made was just amazing, and it still holds up today 40 plus years later, and mostly slept on site, insistent on getting things right, which you do see on screen. Bottin was a perfectionist, and when filming scenes, Rob tried to make everything as dark as he could. It was not uncommon to see Dean Cundey arguing with his buddy Rob about the lighting, and John Carpenter was between them trying to mediate. Finally, Cundey was noted to say, "I got to light the goddamn scene." As time went on, Universal grew very concerned over rumors of labor strikes that were on the horizon in mid-October 1981, so the studio wanted to avoid their productions being affected by it. So they asked the cast and crew if they could rush the production to finish all stage work with principals before that date. The team did what they were told, and as the projected strike date approached, the crew achieved their goal and finished filming at Universal. At this point, they roughly had 80 to 85% of the film in the can, and the cast and crew would get some time off for a short bit while they waited for the snows to fall thoroughly at the location set on the border of Alaska and British Columbia. This would fundamentally help the film in the end, because now John Carpenter looked at what he filmed so far. And we will explore the exact changes John did to this film in our next video. Until then, take a helicopter flight and enjoy the friendly skies with Palmer after he's stoned. On second thought, maybe you should find something safer to do.
Hey, thanks for thinking about it, though.
We also want to announce we have a new Patreon. You'll be able to see videos early, and we plan to make a special series for Patreon exclusive members, which will debut later this month or early next month. We will see you next time. If you like what you see here, click like and subscribe. Super thanks helps, and so does sharing. We appreciate you being here.